Hi, we're living in times of unprecedented change where the challenges that we're facing, both individually and as a species on the planet, are brand new. You know, this climate change conversation invites us to look at the importance of stepping out of our old story of ourselves as, largely seeing ourselves through our human eyes as livers in the third and fourth dimensional realities inside polarized consciousness here on planet Earth, and back somehow into connection with the souls that we are, the joy that we are within our experiencing ourselves as multidimensional beings. And nowhere is this more important than in this climate changing conversation that we're involved in, because the old solutions from our old stories, from just looking at things either in scientific terms or in religious terms or in secular terms, however we've boxed our understanding of looking ahead, looking at our world, through whatever lens we're using, is no longer enough. We need to create massive change on the planet in order to sustain life, to learn to live sustainably. So what stops us from doing that? Well, have you ever experienced eco-anxiety? Just anxiety about the state of the world. Eco-grief, deep and passionate sadness about the state that the world is in. Eco-helplessness, eco-stress, eco-paralysis, all of these are words that are becoming new words on the planet in response to these emotional reactions that we have to looking at just how desperate the world is for change. And we feel this, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. So in this interview, I'll be chatting again with Dr. Stephanie Mines, who's a neuroscientist and the dream holder and visionary about climate change that created this Climate Change and Consciousness, Our Legacy for the Earth conference that's coming up in April 2019, and out of which are forming local hubs to localize responses. There's more about that, and I'll include some other links to some of the other conversations that Stephanie and I have had about this. But in this interview, this is such an important interview. I'm so excited to have this with Stephanie, because what we're looking at is the human part of our experiences, these emotional reactions we have around grief, around anxiety, around depression, around stress and feeling paralyzed. This sense of what can I do to be part of the solution? The problems are so big, how can anything I do make a difference? These are part of our reaction to the ecological stress, the field that we're all in a part of together. So in this interview, Dr. Mines is going to be sharing with us about the central nervous system, about how our responses are hardwired into us, well, not hardwired so much as softwired into us by our previous experiences in the old story, in painful, upsetting, overwhelming experiences we had as children, the coping skills that we learned to cope with that, which are embedded inside our central nervous system, and what we can do. It's a longer conversation. It's about 20 minutes, but please stay till the end of it, because one of the things that Stephanie does, which I'm so excited to share about, is what do we do about this? When you're in the middle of feeling grief, despair, frozen in fear, unable to go on, anxiety, what can you do about that? So she's got 3 simple tips that I promise you are very profound. I've used Jinshin, which is the system that she teaches, for about 5 years now, and it's powerful. They're very simple movements, but because they're based on re-educating our central nervous system, they're very powerful. So if this is what you're looking for, then you've come to the right place, because it's a really inspiring look at how this climate change conversation can really begin to help us develop a new story about who we are in the world now, here and now, rather than responding in ways that we're perhaps more habituated to responding in. So if you and I haven't met before, I'm Deb Swanfeld. I'm a trauma therapist and a sound healer. And I'm passionate about creating change on the planet, creating a planet that is livable, that is enjoyable in terms of enjoying ourselves, and that will be so for future generations as well. So welcome to Finding Joy, and to this particular conversation. Let's jump in now. So here we are with Dr. Stephanie Mines again. Welcome back, Stephanie. It's wonderful to have you back again. And we're talking again, ongoing conversation about climate change and how we are each and all part of the solution. And today, we're going to invite you to speak to, as the neuroscientist that you are, and all the wisdom and information that you have about neuroscience and how the brain is involved in our emotional and mental health. If we could look at, in the end, what we want to get to is these feelings that we're all having from time to time about eco-grief, eco-anxiety, eco-stress, and particularly eco-paralysis, where it just feels like we're frozen in fear and can't do anything about that. So I know you've got some great tips for us, but before we get to that, if we could begin maybe with just a bit of information from you about the central nervous system in human beings.
Well, I would like to begin, Deb, with talking about the impact of climate change on the nervous system generally. And I want people to be aware that the way that they respond individually, whether it's conscious or unconscious, it's impossible to avoid the impact of climate change, even if you do your best to do so, because it's permeating the environment. And the way that you respond to that threat, that sense of threat, is absolutely dependent on how you have responded to threat historically. So all of us carry in our central nervous system all of the information of how we have met threatening circumstances throughout the spectrum of our entire biography. And that information is stored cellularly and shapes really the behavior of the nervous system and the adrenal system in particular. And it's very individuated, it's highly unique. But what can be said generally is that each one of us, until we have differentiated the past from the present, are responding from our past experience of threat when a new threat arrives. And a threat of the scope of climate change is going to evoke the memories that we have of large threats, such as one like that. So that's the nature of how the brain stores memory. It's conditional. And so a big threat brings up the entire database that we have individually of big threats that we've faced before. And we are going to be operating with that past association until we differentiate the past from the present. So I see climate change as an incredible opportunity to differentiate the past from the present. So the noted economist, author of Sacred Economy, Charles Eisenstein, whose latest book is about climate change, refers to this transition from the old story to the new story. Yeah. So that is the same thing. The old story is our past experience of threat. The new story is what's possible for us when we differentiate the past from the present. So I just want that piece of information to sink in, because to differentiate the past from the present, to understand that we are responding to climate change based on our past experience of threat, is in itself a sign of leadership. If you're willing to consider that that is the necessity to go from the old story, as Charles Eisenstein says, into the new story, which is to fully inhabit the present, we have to actively do that differentiation.
Yes, and I think, you know, what's crucial there, in my experience working with people who've experienced profound traumatic insult at different points in their lives, is really that so much of that is held in our personal and collective human unconscious. So we may not even be aware consciously of it, but we, you know, the feelings that get evoked are meaningful to each and all of us. So when you look at that, then Stephanie, in terms of, I love this vision about this, you know, the climate change, we're all with our backs in a corner up against the wall kind of thing, in terms of looking at, ooh, you know, where are we headed? But there is a beautiful opportunity for us here to clear out our perception of life that's based on the old stories that we've been carrying for so long, and really step into what's possible in this now moment. It's beautiful, Stephanie. So you have some resources for doing that, and I just want to mention, and I will put this into the description down below, the link to your book. You know, a number of years ago, you prophetically wrote a book called We Are All in Shock: How Overwhelming Experiences Shatter Us, Shatter You, and What You Can Do About It. And that's a very useful book for people who are interested in, now that we're in these times, really looking at what can I do about this when I'm feeling blocked, when I'm feeling paralyzed, when I'm feeling like I just can't look at this anymore. You've got a number of wonderful practical strategies in that book. But I know that you volunteered to share some of those with us today as well, with people who are watching our interview.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I want to say, you know, I'm a neuroscientist, I'm a trauma therapist, and my laboratory really has been my own life. And I will tell you candidly that nothing has accelerated my healing process more than climate change. Through my response to climate change, which is built on, of course, all the healing work that I've done that preceded it, but the direct response that I've had to climate change through creating climate change and consciousness, our legacy for the earth, and all the permutations on that creation, really represent the highest new story for me, the most thorough way in which I have stepped into the present and stepped out of the past. So I want to share with the world the resources that have allowed me to make this leap out of the old story into the new story, so that even the transition time, the sort of big gap between the old story and the new story, has been minimized, so that I have stepped gracefully and elegantly and fluidly into the new story. And I incorporate into my neuroscience, I would call this actually ancient neuroscience, traditional neuroscience. So I was fortunate enough to be the student of a magnificent teacher from Japan named Mary Ino Burmeister, who taught me the art of Jinshin, which is an applied touch system that speaks directly to the nervous system. So I have adapted everything that I learned from Mary specifically for the resolution of trauma. So I understand that the nervous system tends to organize itself into either sympathetic or parasympathetic dominances in response to threat based on what succeeds at an earlier time. So you might describe the sympathetic response as eco-anxiety and the parasympathetic response as eco-paralysis. So the sympathetic response would be panic, would be a sense of urgency that almost disallows organized thought. because it's so accelerated. And then the parasympathetic response would be denial or collapse or despair or depression, a complete sense of incapacity to address what seems like extremely daunting challenges. So there is a place in the middle, you know, a place, I would call it the place of intelligent activism, resilience, that incorporates self-care and self-awareness. That doesn't say.
Sorry, Steph, and more than that, you know, because we've talked about this before, it also includes joy and deep creativity.
Absolutely, absolutely. And creativity that is surprising. You know, I now have creativity about collaboration and organizing. I didn't used to have that kind of creativity. So that's a sign of neuroresilience, that the brain is evolving, which is really the purpose of this time, is evolution. So I use a variety of hands-on approaches that match my sympathetic dominance. And I want to also share what can be done for the parasympathetic dominance or the eco-paralysis or denial. So for the eco-paralysis, we want to bring up the capacity to face what is daunting. So those individuals who are parasympathetic dominant learn to withdraw. So there was safety and survival in withdrawal. And so we will revert to that if we have the memory on a cellular physiological level that that is what succeeded in the past. So we want to send communication to the nervous system, and this has to be repeated because this is your old story. And so you need repeated instruction, repeated gentle and loving reminders that that was then and this is now, and now we can literally rise to the occasion. We can meet these circumstances. So I'm going to suggest that we open up the capacity of the adrenal system, and you can do that in a number of ways. The way that we withdraw when we actually have the option to meet the challenge is that we produce excessive amounts of cortisol. So that happens in the kidney adrenal system. So we have to remind that system that it doesn't need that much cortisol. So when you lower the cortisol output, you're going to increase the adrenal output. And that is then going to give you the impulse, the motivation, which is what you're waiting for to meet the challenge. So there are many ways to do that. One very simple way is to actually hold the index finger. People are surprised that such a simple gesture would make such a big difference, but it does. So each one of the fingers is a messenger to different energetic structures and responses. And the index finger is the messenger to the adrenal system. So simply by holding the index finger, you can begin to tonify adrenal response, bring it into equilibrium. The other thing you can do is place the palm of your hand on your coccyx, which you can't see me doing that, but it's quite a simple thing. You place the palm of your hand on your coccyx, and then you place, I'll see if I can adjust my camera here so that you can see. You're going to place your other hand and whatever fingers are comfortable in the middle of your chest. So right between the breasts. So this combination, coccyx and middle of the chest, sends a similar message to the adrenal system to come into equilibrium, to balance cortisol with adrenaline. So that's the suggestion. 2 suggestions: the index finger and the coccyx.
Both hands, Stephanie? Both hands, like going back and forth?
Absolutely, yes. And repeatedly, you know, you can't do this too much. There's no harm in repeating the interventions. And then the other the palm of the hand on the coccyx, the other hand, whatever fingers, no specific fingers, even the palm can be used as well, on the middle of the chest. That will send another message of equilibrium to the kidney adrenal functions.
Beautiful.
So for the sympathetic dominance, you want to actually slow things down. You want to lessen excessive adrenaline output, which is the nature of sympathetic dominance. So that is a memory that action is what will save you from death. This is a life or death response from an event that happened long ago.
So
We don't know what
Stephanie,
it is.
sorry, but so just in terms of the emotional feeling that's connected to that would be anxiety or panic?
Yeah, anxiety, panic, just restlessness, agitation,
Yeah.
trembling, just this kind of unresolvable intensity
Yeah.
that doesn't lead to action. It just leads to exhaustion because it's like drinking a cup of coffee with, extra shots. You just get revved up and you can't do anything, and then you collapse in exhaustion. So it's not productive. The adrenaline, in a balanced way, on the other hand, is very necessary fuel for the kind of perseverance and endurance that we need for sustained climate change activism. So I, for instance, have been working on climate change and consciousness. I'm going into my third year of work on this, and I feel very blessed that I've been able to sustain focus, attention, creativity, resilience, follow through, and I rely on this system to do that for me. So I want to show you another site that will have this effect of actually slowing things down and allowing you to be less agitated and to consider, calm and pause moments of self-care so that you can, in fact, move forward. And so I want to direct you to the collarbones on the front of the body. And if you place your fingertips, and there's no specificity here, you don't have to worry about an exact site. You can be in a general area. You can use whatever fingers you want. So if you place your fingertips at the edge of your collarbones, this site brings into the body the sense, the physiology of contentment. So it may seem paradoxical, but it's entirely possible to feel, even in the midst of your climate activism, that you are content. You are content because you are doing what you are here to do. And while even all this activity is circulating around you, you return to this place of contentment. And that contentment includes within it a heart opening that's inevitable as part of this contentment. Your heart is opening to yourself. Your heart is opening to humanity. Your heart is opening to the natural world that is joining you in your climate activism. You're not alone. You're part of a global and multidimensional movement for climate activism. And there is peace, joy, serenity, and contentment in that experience. So that's the capacity that can be aroused in you from holding this area right by your collarbones.
Wow, that's beautiful. Allowing us then to also step into, when we feel contented, we're not thinking from a state of panic. We are, able to access our frontal lobes and really begin to think much more creatively about problem solving, about solutions. Lateral thinking can happen, left brain and right brain sort of coming together in terms of how we're thinking. So it's the key to really moving ahead in a more conscious way. And we've had a conversation about how important consciousness is in our work together. I also just want to remind people, and I'll put a link down here, when people are trying these, holding these sacred sites, And if you find them helpful, Stephanie also has a magnificent resource. It's a set of cards that are called the Sacred Sites. That's what you called it, yeah? And I've had them for years, and you know, they're like any intuitive set of cards. You can look specifically for what you're looking for, or you can just draw one and know that usually the right card comes up in terms of what's helpful for you. So I will put a link to that deck of cards as well down below, because these are really strategies for moving forward into the adulthood of what it is to be human on the planet. You know, moving out of sort of these emotional states of you know, to some extent feeling victimized by maybe what's happened in our past, whether it's conscious or unconscious, and really into taking responsibility, the ability to respond by learning some of these sacred sites. So I want to thank you, Stephanie. I mean, this I feel is such an important conversation for people to understand that there are definitely things. We don't have to stay stuck in paralysis. We don't have to put our heads in the sand like the ostrich and avoid looking at what's unpleasant. In fact, when we do that, things only get worse. So there's this sense of, you know, we can step into our own personal power. We can try some of these sacred sites and some of these other ways that we're going to be talking about around even just coming together collectively and feeling like we're taking action creates joy, creates new possibilities, creates states of consciousness that we usually wouldn't think about as a result of climate change. Yeah.
Thank you, Deb. I just can't tell you how surprised I have been at the evolution of my creativity into new spheres as a result of my response to climate change. And I never could have predicted this in my own life. And I feel just so much gratitude and joy that I am evolving in this way to meet the current needs of humanity.
It's so beautiful, Stephanie. Thank you again so much for sharing all your wisdom about the nervous system, our human central nervous system, and you know, the contributions. You know, what we perceive is going to be based on our past experiences until we decide to separate that out, that old story, from what's happening here and now. And you've given us some beautiful techniques for doing that. So I really want to thank you again. And we'll see you next time on the next conversation about the gifts and the challenges of living through these climate changing times.
Thank you, Deb.
So if you've enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Stephanie Mines and the topics around finding your own joy, being part of the climate change conversation, you know, if these are topics that are of interest to you, please remember to like this video down below and to subscribe. If you would like to know when my new interviews or videos come out, then please remember to hit the subscribe button below and touch the notification bell, and that will let you know when the new videos come up. Meantime, thank you for being part of the community. If you want to comment down below on what touched your heart the most in this interview with Dr. Stephanie Mines, please leave your comment down below. If there are topics that you would like us to look at on this Finding Joy channel, then please let us know that as well. Thanks so much for being all that you are. Until next time.